Welcome to Lost Ancient Mysteries. On this channel, we'll deep dive into the world of lost technology, metaphysics, archaeology, ancient mysteries, and much more. For my first video, I wanted to highlight some unique and mysterious things that I saw on a recent trip to Egypt. Egypt is such a magical and mystical place. I came back with more questions than answers, but full of passion and conviction. And I wanted to share some of the mysteries of ancient history that I was fortunate enough to visit in person and see firsthand with you guys. I'll be going into more detail about some of these sites and objects as well as potential technologies used in later videos. One of the more exciting experiences was to go inside the recently reopened Step Pyramid. After 14 years of renovation, groups are now allowed to go into the tunnels underneath the pyramid again. And it was amazing. There are miles of tunnels under the pyramid, and many of the tunnels used to have these beautiful blue tiles lining the walls. Some of the tiles are still in place. This photo shows a hallway that was lined with these blue tiles from floor to ceiling. Can you imagine what that would have looked like when it was newly finished? I also got to walk around the large box structure below the step pyramid. Previously, this box could only be seen from a viewing platform well above the box structure itself. Our guide even described to us how there is evidence on the sides of the stones that form this box structure that indicate it was moved to this location from a previous location. There's also part of a column inside it, which you can actually see from the viewing platform inside of the pyramid. I wonder why it's in there. This image is just a still shot from a video that I took of that column. Here is an extremely blurry image from Google showing the box as seen from that viewing platform. I'm sorry it's such a terrible image. This is just the only one that I could find that had Creative Commons licensing marked in my attempt to not break copyright law. You can see the top of the column at the left-hand side of the box, despite how blurry the picture is. The step pyramid also had over 40,000 precisely carved stone pots and vases underneath it. When we were exploring the tunnels, I got to see piles of fragments from those stone pots still in place where the archaeologists had been working. The tool marks on the pots are not indicative of the pounding method. Since they're made from stone and not clay pottery, they can't have been spun on a potter's wheel. This photo shows the base of a pot that has been displayed next to a rock. You can see the perfectly circular tooling mark at the bottom of the pot or bowl, as if a machine was used to make this. You do not get the same crease at the bottom of the inside of a pot or bowl like this from a potter's wheel. Nor would you get the same perfect symmetry in tooling this by hand, at least that I'm aware of. Another fragment had a similar circle to the previous image in the center of it, but it was a flatter piece like a plate. The lip on the edge was perfectly smooth, and I couldn't see any tooling marks at all. The precision was astounding. More pics of these to come in later videos. The temple sites around the Step Pyramid and the Unas Pyramid, where the oldest version of the pyramid texts are found, also showed amazing precision in how they were constructed. One of the many reasons I wanted to visit Egypt in the first place was to see the famous construction that is so precise that you can't fit even a human hair between the blocks. Well, that's freaking true. In many places throughout Egypt, it's hard to tell where one block ends and another begins, because the seams are almost invisible or, in some cases, appear to be molded together. At this site, between the Unas and Step Pyramids, the seams were very crisp and noticeable, and the lines were perfect even after thousands of years and countless hands touching the blocks. The entryway at one area of the temple complex even had an acoustic resonance feature in the ceiling. Each of the accordion-like rolls is perfectly rounded and smooth as if they were formed in a mold. The resonant effect inside it was beautiful too, even with both sides of the entryway open, allowing the sound to escape. Here is an image of the hieroglyphs that make up the pyramid text inside of the Unas Pyramid. I'll go into more detail about these in another video. These hieroglyphs were carved into plaster, which is one of the reasons that you can see some brush strokes around the hieroglyphs if you look closely enough. One thing that trips me out looking at the photos is the optical illusion of whether they were carved into the plaster or pop out of the plaster like a relief carving. They are all carved into the plaster, despite the photos making it look like some of them are carved in relief. There were also channel-cut granite stones lying seemingly at random around the pyramid site that made me wonder if there had been some form of water channeling or potentially a waste management system in place at one point. Other areas looked like they had drainage catches at the outside base of the structure. All in all, it reminded me of other ancient drainage systems, and I'm excited to research possible uses for them at these sites. If you ever get the chance to visit Egypt, make sure to visit the Serapeum at Saqqara. This site is such a mystery, and, according to our guides, possibly one of the greatest ancient mysteries of the world. Mainstream archaeology claims that these boxes were likely giant sarcophagi for Apis bulls, but that theory has never been proven as no bull remains have ever been found. And as far as I'm aware, there's no idology of the bulls anywhere at the site either. The boxes, however, are very precise, and when the lids are in place, hermetically seal. They hermetically seal, as in perfectly airtight. Yet, these are claimed to have been able to have been built with stone pounding tools and copper saws and chisels. It takes diamond and steel technology to get precise enough to create an airtight seal, as far as my knowledge goes. There are countless theories on what these boxes were made and used for. One of our guides believed that the Serrappeum could have been a seed bank, since the boxes hermetically seal, as if the ancient Egyptians were preparing for a cataclysm. However, no one truly knows for sure what these boxes were used for. Another mystery is why some of the boxes appear to be unfinished. Certain parts of the boxes, like the top of this one, still look like they need to be cut down and polished, like that small section at the right-hand side of this box that's not flush with the rest of that side. This box is famous for having been blown open with dynamite to see what was inside of it, since it was still perfectly sealed at the time. Turns out it was empty. No Apis bull carcasses were inside, nor human remains, nor any ancient treasures of any kind. I'm not opposed to the Apis bull theory at all, nor the seed bank theory for that matter. The site is such a mystery, it really could be anything. More to come on the Serapeum at Saqqara in future videos, too. We'll dive deeper into the many theories surrounding this great mystery. One of the most breathtaking sites in Egypt is, of course, the Giza Plateau. It's hard to imagine touring Egypt without at least visiting the 3 famous Giza pyramids. We were fortunate enough to visit the Giza Plateau on the spring equinox, and this photo was taken about an hour before sunset looking west over the plateau. It was stunning despite the cloudy day and haze. For the energy people out there, this was a very special place to be that day. I strongly recommend to anyone interested in that type of energy or spiritual experience. Before I left on this adventure, I had heard countless people mention how difficult it is to express the size and scale of some of these megalithic sites. And they're right. It's impossible, even with wide-angle lenses and a superb zoom. I wish I could describe how much this photo pales in comparison to the real thing. It took about a 40-time zoom to get this shot of one of the large blocks askew at the top of the middle pyramid. I'd love to know what pushed or forced that block to move like that. It is known that the Giza pyramids had casing stones on them that were knocked loose during a great earthquake, and many of the casing stones were carried away to rebuild Cairo after the earthquake. I wonder if this block was dislodged during that earthquake. I need to do more research on this. Stay tuned. There also appear to be support column-like blocks under the remaining casing stones at the top of the middle pyramid, and what seem to be modern bricks stacked together to form large blocks along the corner of the pyramid on the left side of this image. Are the small bricks modern restoration, or are they original to the structure? One thing at the Giza Plateau that doesn't get discussed nearly as often as I believe that it should is the stunning black basalt platform near the Great Pyramid. You can see it from Google Earth or satellite imagery at the center of the east side of the Great Pyramid, and it appears to be inside foundational outlines of a temple that's no longer standing, and in between 2 of the boat pits surrounding the pyramid. Many of the basalt stones were fitted together and some were clearly cut. This particular one shows a very clear saw mark from a power tool of some kind. This is not a mark made by a copper saw wearing through the rock with sand for abrasion over the course of several days. The perfectly smooth line shows the rock was cut quickly, probably in a few minutes, if not seconds. Here's a close-up of the edge showing the smooth precision. The blade of the tool they used was only roughly 1/4 of an inch thick. This saw mark is similar to what we do today with diamond-tipped tools. One theory was that they were using ruby-tipped circular saws that had large diameters. How they got the saws to spin so quickly is a mystery, but I'm very open to this theory. I was also amazed that this is just sitting out in the open like this. Do the mainstream Egyptologists think this was cut with a copper saw using sand for abrasion? I personally don't see how that could possibly be done that way, with the perfectly smooth line, no variation or angled cuts to either side, and the overcut that fades out at the end. One of our guides mentioned that the multiple saw marks above and below the primary mark is a common method used to break away the edges of the stone. They cut into it with a small gap between each cut and then hammer the top of the rock and break away the edges to where the saw marks stop. The additional marks were not completed on this rock for some reason, and thus this portion was never broken off, so it left us with this beautiful saw line. We also had an opportunity that day to visit the inside of the Valley Temple. This is part of the entryway. The construction of the Valley Temple was megalithic, and the polygonal stones reminded me of sites in Peru that use a very similar construction method that I'll detail in later videos. All of the border that can be seen is from modern restorations according to our guides. Here is an image of some of the megalithic stones inside the temple. Yet more stunning precision from the ancient Egyptians. How they moved these stones, lifted them, and placed them without damage is beyond me. The Egyptian Museum was also fascinating. They have entire statues, large sarcophagi, and more amazing stone boxes brought from temple sites across the country on display. This guy was one of several statues greeting me at the entrance. The Grand Egyptian Museum, which will be opening soon, will be set up very similarly to this. I've seen concept drawings of a giant Ramses statue at the entrance. One artifact that I sought out at the museum and was so thankful they still had on display despite the fact that many of the artifacts were being transferred to the Grand Egyptian Museum at the time was the schist disc. The museum had it listed as an artifact carved out of schist, but our guide said that it was actually made from slate. And slate is a metamorphic rock that often breaks apart in sheets or flakes. Slate is difficult to shape or carve, but the flat flakes it breaks into are often used for roofing as a type of shingle according to the internet. How this was carved into these curved edges is beyond my imagination. There are many theories out there as to what this was used for, more of that to come in later videos. One of the places that really hit me spiritually, emotionally, and archaeologically was Abydos. Abydos was one place I really wanted to visit the most while in Egypt. This image is of the Abydos Kings List inside the Temple of Seti I. The Abydos Kings List is immensely valuable to history because it lists the 76 pharaohs that preceded Seti I, spanning almost 1,700 years, starting with the first dynasty in 3000 BC. The list ends with Seti I, the father of Ramses II, who is the famous pharaoh from the biblical Exodus story. One thing that I made sure to seek out at the Seti I temple was the section of hieroglyphs that appeared to depict a helicopter, submarine, and tank. And in person, boy, do they sure look like modern machines. Our guides had a phenomenal explanation to this that I hadn't heard before. They said this was actually two sets of hieroglyphs, one written over the other. There's a layer of hieroglyphs from the time of Seti I, and then during the times of Ramses II, new hieroglyphs were carved over them without removing the older ones first. Here's an example showing the two dynasties highlighted separately. Pause the video for these images if needed so you can take a longer look at them. And here they are combined. This theory really does make sense to me, but my primary question is why the later dynasty wouldn't erase the older hieroglyphs before adding their own by either sanding them out or covering them over. Because this method makes it difficult to read the newer hieroglyphs on top of the older ones. However, when you see the two side by side and then merged like this, it really does make sense. What are your thoughts? The Osirion was one of the sites that I was most looking forward to visiting. One of our guides even said that this could possibly be the oldest temple in Egypt, if not the world. There is a lot going on at the Osirion, and this will need to be detailed more in later videos. But one thing is that there are stairs below the waterline in the pools at either end of the temple that lead down to at least one lower level, if not more. It's difficult to find much info on the levels below the fluctuating waterline, but we were fortunate enough to visit at a time when that water level was quite low. The megalithic stones in the center of the structure are the largest in the temple. Some, like this one shown, have had hieroglyphs added to them by later generations of Egyptians. Our guides did not believe the hieroglyphs to be part of the original temple site. The walls surrounding the center of the temple are polygonal and have beveled edges that reminded me of the walls of the Valley Temple at Giza and other ancient sites in Peru. Noticed the recessed carving to make the doorframe too. Isn't that stunning? And here's something that just boggles the mind. This block is carved around the corner, twice. You have a typical outside corner here and an inside corner here. That's fair, but the block doesn't end there. It ends here. It requires a significant increase in labor to carve out a brick this way to make a corner. I would love for an engineer to comment on what the purpose of this would be. Is it for structural security to make the building more earthquake-proof, or is there another reason? What justifies the additional amount of labor needed to do all of this extra work for this construction method? We do not build with this method today, and I'm curious as to why. Here's a typical modern brick wall. You have the same outer corner here, where the edge of the molded brick is used to create the outside corner, like our megalithic block was cut to form the same outside corner. But the bricks at the inside corner are a mortared seam. And in this example of one method of constructing a modern brick wall, neither of these corners required multiple cuts in the brick. Each brick is only a four-cornered rectangle. This image is of a stone over the southwestern entrance of the temple. Someone had to point out the saw mark at the top to me. I was too busy looking at other things. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. Here it is pointed out. It runs across the entire block of stone, and the saw blade that was used does not appear to have been made from a thick metal, as you can see from the shadowing in the sections that had the most rock cut away. I wish I had been able to reach it to take measurements, but my guess is that the blade that was used to cut this stone was maybe 1/4 of an inch thick, similar to the saw mark in the basalt stone next to the Great Pyramid. Throughout the Osirion temple site, you can see stones where the beveled edges had been cut away, likely by later generations of Egyptians to add hieroglyphs. I'm not sure why this was left unfinished, but you can see where they had stopped shaving it away towards the bottom of the image. But no hieroglyphs have been added to this wall. This photo shows yet another section that was carved away to smooth the surface. Our guides say that they were carved flat like this to add the hieroglyphs, but I'm curious if there were any additional reasons. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section too if you have a theory. Since we were fortunate enough to visit on a day where the water levels were low, I noticed someone in my tour group looking at this hole carved into the side of one of the pools that I had disregarded earlier simply because there was just so much to look at and explore. But one of our guides mentioned a previous group having stuck a tape measure in there and it went back at least 9 feet. So I decided to stick my phone in it to see how the hole was oriented, and it pointed perfectly to magnetic north, not true north. I double-checked my phone settings. The compass was set to point to magnetic north. What blows my mind is how a site constructed thousands of years ago can stay perfectly oriented to magnetic north when magnetic north is constantly shifting. Only true north stays consistent. So I then asked one of our guides how he thought this was even possible, and the only explanation he could come up with was that the site is somehow generating its own magnetic field. It's not uncommon for magnetic fields to fluctuate around the world. I grew up near Sedona, and that place is full of small magnetic anomalies because of all of the iron in the soil. It makes complete sense. But the Osirion didn't have any noticeable iron in the soil or iron metalwork on the site, because it was made before the Iron Age. So I'm curious as to what is generating that magnetic field. Someone also had to point out to me where the flower of life in the Osirion was. I couldn't find it. It's about 8 feet above the floor at the temple, so you have to look up to see it. There are theories out there that this is not simply painted on. There's a lot of debate out there as well as to whether this was original to the site or added later. But I believe the majority consensus is that it was added later. I recall hearing a theory that it was tested in a lab and it wasn't paint or any known ancient pigment. I need to do more research on this before posting a video about it, but I'd love to hear everyone's theories in the comments. I'm happy to research all theories to share on here in later videos. We also visited Luxor Temple at night. It's a beautiful sight to visit after sunset, the way they have it lit up. Plus, you get a break from the searing Luxor heat. There used to be 2 obelisks at this site, one on each side of the entrance, but the 23-meter-tall obelisk that used to be on the right side is now in Paris. More to come on that story in later videos. The columns throughout the temple are beautiful too, especially when lit up at night. And it's amazing to me how much of the ceiling still remains. Many of us in the group loved this statue. The attention to detail on his calf muscle is amazing, and the beige ribbon of stone running across his right calf is beautiful. This photo barely does the size justice. This photo was taken while standing. His foot is close to the height of my chest. I'm a fairly short person, only about 5'2", but this gives you some perspective. And this statue is sitting. Just imagine how small you'd feel next to one of these standing statues, where a typical adult standing upright barely reaches their knee, if not just the feet, due to the platform below the statue. That's how all of the sites in Egypt are. They're astounding in size and complexity. This photo is a bit more graphic, but here's some imagery inside of the Luxor Temple that is full of debate as to the meaning of it. This image clearly shows a fertility symbol that appears to be ejaculating. And if you look closely at the end of the stream is what appears to be a single sperm cell. However, the structure of the sperm wasn't discovered until 1677. So how the Egyptians knew of this is a huge mystery. Many Egyptologists believe this is just a pot with water flowing out of it, but our guides did not believe this to be the case after further analysis. The wall continues with the imagery, but my photos did not turn out due to the low light levels. However, our guides explained how the imagery on this wall could be describing immaculate conception or artificial insemination. If that's true, just let that sink in for a moment. Did the Egyptians have artificial insemination? Did they put sperm into a bowl and then insert it into a woman later while the sperm was still viable? More to come on this in later videos. And in my next video, we'll continue with my adventures in Egypt, including my visit to the Hathor Temple at Dendera, where I crawled through a small tunnel to see the Dendera bulbs. I'll also describe theories on what these bulbs could be from my group's guides in that video as well. Stay tuned!